All right, we are back with yet another season, the second season of Why Wasn't It
Woo!
Better?
Season 2.
I am your host, Patrick Darms.
And I'm your co-host, Anton Pross.
And joining us on this season 2 premiere is our very first guest of the season, because if it's the first episode, it has to be the first guest by default, our friend, Peter Baldeo.
Welcome,
Peter,
Pete.
welcome.
Thank you. I would also like to add probably the best guest of the season thus far, so I will take the accolades.
Yeah,
You're
definitely.
absolutely right about that. We are gathered here today to discuss Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines. Yes, we are just weeks away from the 20th anniversary of this movie, which is, in addition to making me feel fairly old, it's easy to overlook just how highly anticipated this movie was when it came out in July of 2003. This was absolutely one of the most highly anticipated sequels of all time. Pete, is there anything you want to plug or shout out before we get into this?
Plug or shout out? Oh man. Okay, I was gonna save this for the question of why you chose the movie, but I think this is perfect timing to say I think it's very timely to have me on this podcast considering what's going on in the world with AI, ChatGPT, and all of this nonsense of everyone trying to kill us and take us for everything we're worth. I think that's one of the biggest things. I think I am an AI optimist. I think science fiction is something that's very fascinating. I'm just curious to see what actually happens because I think a lot of this rooted in pop culture, good and bad, is just something that we're going to look back on in 20 years and laugh at, or hopefully it's going to save us and not kill us.
So it's a big shout out to any and all AI out there, and potentially to my toaster that may rise against me.
Yeah, agreed. And my Sonos speaker too that's now listening because our entire house is wired, so.
Hey, get that wiretap out of there. Yeah, if to any AI that are listening to this in the future, don't hold this against us. This is all in good fun.
Yeah, remember, what is it, like that Dane Cook skit where you always be nice to them? Remember, we are optimists for you guys.
It's a very good way of looking at it. I guess some admin before we really get into the discussion of this movie. Anton, we kind of neglected this when we did our season recap, but congratulations to the Denver Nuggets on winning their first NBA title.
Oh my gosh. Denver finally getting their parade.
Yes. And congratulations to Manchester City on winning the Champions League, their first Champions League trophy, thus completing the treble.
Big congrats.
Yeah.
Boo.
But that's it as far as admin. We kind of did all the admin we really needed to do when we did the season 1 recap / season 2 preview. I'll intro this for us. Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines was released on July 2nd, 2003 by Intermedia and C2 Films. It was directed by Jonathan Mostow, screenplay by John Brancato and Michael Ferris, with an additional story credit for Terry Sarafian, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Nick Stahl, Claire Danes, Kristana Loken, and David Andrews. A budget of $187 million and a box office return of $433 million. Peter, as our guest, artificial intelligence aside, ChatGPT notwithstanding, why have you chosen this movie to discuss?
Wow. Okay. So I got to go back to T1 and T2. I think these are movies that I spent my childhood writhing in fear about, thinking that these monsters were going to come kill us. And as I grew up, I still feel that way. It's just a movie that's been with me my entire life. I think T1, I think, was fascinating. T2 is fascinating. T3, I think it's perfect for discussion. But I think it's been something in pop culture that's been important to me my entire life. And I'm a huge sci-fi fan. So I'm honored.
Well, we're honored to have you. Yeah, this is the 20th anniversary of this movie. And I mentioned this a little bit in the teaser, but, a lot of time has passed. There's been, I honestly don't know how many Terminator sequels since this movie. I've kind of lost track. Let's just call them all.
I think 3.
Disappointed. That sounds right, sure. Salvation.
Dark Fate, right?
Dark Fate. Vegas Vacation.
There was the
series,
one where Fox series.
Yeah. Which actually wasn't bad. I actually enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty good.
But there was also the one where they couldn't spell Genesis right. It was like Genesis.
Yep. That was it.
Didn't see that. But none of those were as highly anticipated as this one. I mean, this was, when this finally hit theaters in July of 2003, like, I remember being tremendously excited for it. I mean,
Huge hype.
just like with you, P, I grew up watching the first two movies. I've probably seen each one of them, I don't know, 50 times.
Easy.
And they were staples of the action genre and science fiction. One of the coolest sci-fi ideas I think ever put to film. You know, regardless of what you think of this movie now, Terminator 3, we all wanted this. Like when we found out finally around the turn of the millennium that there was finally going to be a third Terminator film, we were all pumped. We all wanted it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Schwarzenegger and Cameron, they had been asked in interviews throughout the 90s, like constantly, like when's there going to be a third Terminator movie? Speaking of 20th anniversaries, Anton, I did the research for this. Not that it was extensive research because it just involved a Wikipedia article, but so we already covered Matrix Reloaded, which was an even more hyped sequel that came out earlier that year in 2003. But look at what else we got in 2003. Just in the summer, all the following movies came out within 2 or 3 months of each other. Matrix Reloaded, this movie, Finding Nemo, the first Pirates of the Caribbean, X-Men 2, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Too Fast, Too Furious, Bad Boys 2, Bruce Almighty, and the Eric Bana Hulk.
Oof. As you just listed all of those, I already felt old saying it's the 20th anniversary of this film.
Yeah.
That's the official "you're old now" list.
Yeah,
yes.
Agreed. Because I remember seeing every one of those movies like in the theater, and like, it was the coolest thing ever.
That's just the summer. Later that year, for award season, we got Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, Master and Commander, The Last Samurai, Cold Mountain, Lost in Translation. I don't even have them all listed here. Great movie year, 2003.
That's a great year. That's a great year for movies. That's a great year for movies. Dang.
Just
so
tremendous.
Essentially what you said is we got
happened.
to see the final chapter of the original Lord of the Rings in 2003. Which, yeah, Anton, we are officially old, man.
I had not seen this movie in particular since it actually came out in theaters. I don't think I had seen it since. So I was pretty excited to revisit it. Anton, what's your memory of this?
Oh, man, just like very excited to, like, as a kid, I was excited to see this one, just loving the original first two. I was also, you know, listeners know I'm a very big video game fan, and one of my favorite arcade games was the T2 shooter. There was like the red and blue like Uzi style. It was like the light gun machine. Definitely a fun franchise that like I enjoyed a lot as a kid and was very excited to see Terminator 3. And especially from the previews, I was like, whoa, a female Terminator. This could be fun. But we all know how that turned out.
Do we? We're not teasing anything.
Patrick, you're very excited about T3. Why don't we dive into the production history?
The history of this movie is far more interesting than the movie itself. That is all I have to say. It's also as complicated a making of as I've ever seen. I will try to make the most of this timeline for you all. Believe it or not, James Cameron did not have any financial stake in this movie, despite developing the original story and obviously the first two films himself. He actually sold his stake to the Terminator rights to his then wife, Gail Ann Hurd, for $1 back in 1984 while the first movie was being released.
Dang.
Yeah, I was pretty shocked to hear that because he's really known as a director that gets paid. But of course, back then he was in a much different point of his career. Now, one thing to note when I tell this story, Terminator 2 was produced by a company called Coralco Pictures. That is a film company that was founded by these two gentlemen named Mario Kassar and Andrew G. Vajna. Some of the other movies that Coralco produced were the Rambo series, Total Recall, Basic Instinct, Cliffhanger, Showgirls, and the infamous box office bomb Cutthroat Island, which actually lost them so much money that it bankrupted their studio in 1995. So pretty high profile stuff.
I'm surprised it wasn't Showgirls.
Yeah, I was about to say, I was like, that movie was horrendous.
Yeah, actually, coincidentally enough, Showgirls also came out in 1995, so pretty much a career year for them.
Dang.
But yeah, so they went out of business. And when it came to the possibility of a third film, James Cameron flip-flopped a number of times throughout the 90s. He would tease it, but he would never firmly commit to it. But immediately following Terminator 2's release in 1991, he stated he had no intentions for sequels, believing, quote, it brings the story full circle and it ends. He was referring to the second film. Continuing that quote, he said, I think ending it at this point is a good idea. end quote. And his co-writer, William Wisher, said that they wrote the script intending to leave no option for a sequel. Put a pin in that. It's worth pointing out, one of the most common criticisms of this movie is that it's an unnecessary sequel and that the story had been told in the first two movies. Now, without stepping on the reasons of why wasn't it better, I just want to say, for the record, I do disagree with that in principle because at the very least, James Cameron did have a serious interest in making a sequel at one point. So we'll never know what that sequel would have been, but we do know about Cameron that when he's interested in making something, and it seems like he does it.
Arguably, we did get that a version of the vision with what was the 2019 film release? It was the
Vegas
Return
Vacation?
of Sarah. The Vegas Vacation, because I think that film just completely disregards T3 and the previous sequels, and James Cameron was back on the helm, but as a producer, not the director. Just wanted to shout that out.
Oh, that retcons Terminator 3? I didn't even say it, to be honest.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Here's the other question. Do we know that he had a serious interest in making the sequel, or was it more of he had a serious interest in making the sequel because of financial interest? Was it artistic enjoyment or money?
That's fair. That's fair. Not enough looked into for that particular film because also I wasn't that interested in it. So something we can maybe revisit. If listeners are interested, we'll revisit it.
When did that movie come out? Like 2018?
I want to say it was at 2018, 2019.
I can't imagine he was doing anything just for money at that point.
Right, because, I mean, I don't think James Cameron's a guy that's ever been wanting for money.
No.
He's got that Titanic money, that Avatar money.
Oh, fair. Yep. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think
fair.
he needs money.
Yeah,
but it is interesting. He wanted to do this at a certain point. Now, have either of you ever been to Universal Studios?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Okay, so have you been to the Terminator 2 3D Battle Across Time ride?
Yes.
I love that experience.
Yes.
So much fun.
So much fun. So that opened in 1996, and Cameron was very much involved in the making of that. It reunited the main cast of Terminator 2, and it actually prompted him to begin writing a script for a third Terminator movie. And he said that the ride would serve as a, quote, stepping stone towards a third Terminator film. But, of course, because money is always a factor, when Carolco filed for bankruptcy in late 1995, a judge ruled that the Terminator sequel rights would ultimately be auctioned off through U.S. bankruptcy court. 20th Century Fox, they intended to purchase the rights in this auction. And during 1997, Fox spent months negotiating with Cameron, Schwarzenegger, and Gail Ann Hurd. She's a producer. At that point, she was James Cameron's ex-wife. But Cameron actually agreed to write and produce the film, but he would not commit to directing it. So this is where that Terminator Vegas Vacation movie would end up surfacing 20 years later. And note that in 1997, Cameron was still neck deep in making Titanic. So at the same time, this guy, Andrew Vajna, who was one of the co-founders of Carolco, he was participating in the bidding, trying to get the rights. And ultimately, in 1997, budgetary concerns over the third movie and Cameron's troubled post-production with Titanic, it led to both him and 20th Century Fox abandoning all interest in Terminator 3. Fox decided to not participate in the bidding process, and Cameron gave his blessing to Hurd and Schwarzenegger to make another Terminator film without him.
All right, wanted to pause right there because I found a quote, and this probably just shows to credence how James Cameron regretted this decision. During, I see this in the notes for Dark Fate. That was the film that we're referencing. That was released in 2019. James Cameron said, "We're pretending the other films were a bad dream or an alternate timeline, which is permissible in our multiverse." So he definitely was like, "This, I cannot stand for this." So let's just make sure to remember that when reviewing, when talking about Terminator 3.
Sorry.
So they took his IP and made a movie that he didn't want to be a part of.
Like, I've messed up.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting look on this. So this guy Vajna, by the way, funny name.
Yeah, shout out to this guy. Sounds like
Shouts out to Vajna.
Yeah, he either
Vajna.
sounds like he's a Bond villain or the Mission Impossible villain.
Or both.
Or the Austin Powers villain.
Yeah, could be him also.
Austin Powers Vajna. So he actually ended up he won the rights to the Terminator sequel in October of 1997. He bid $8 million for it, and he made his own attempt to convince Cameron to return, but Cameron just said no. In 1999, Kasser and Vajna, they reunited and they co-founded C2 Pictures. They brought in other companies to help finance the project. The original idea was to have Terminators 3 and 4 shot back to back, possibly with different directors, with the first two slated for a late 2001 release, but these plans were later abandoned. Now, in March of 2000, this guy Teddy Sarafian, he completed a script and he called it T3 Rise of the Machines. It featured John Connor working at a .com company, and the script's villain was the T1G, a female Terminator sent from the future with the ability to turn invisible. I think this was the end of any of the rumors of Cameron being involved. In July of 2000, Cameron was shown the script, but he passed on directing the film for the final time. He later stated that he did not want to be involved because he disliked the idea of using someone else's script based on an idea he created. Now, according to Schwarzenegger, Cameron declined involvement on the project because he did not want to commit to a time frame, as he was busy and had other projects he wanted to explore. And it is worth pointing out, by this point, the turn of the millennium, even though it would not come out until 2009, Cameron was already working on the idea for Avatar. That's how long it took to make that movie.
Wow.
Holy crap.
Years it was simmering in Cameron's mind.
Yeah, he'd been planning it for a while. He did a couple documentaries in between Titanic and Avatar 2.
It was the deep sea diving technology that I think also sprung up from research for Titanic.
Yeah, so he was doing a bunch of stuff. Sounds like he just read the script and thought it sucked.
That's kind of what I got.
Also possible. Arnold, he did not want to do this film without Cameron initially, but Cameron advised him, quote, "If they come up with a good script and they pay you a lot of money, don't think twice." Well, he took his idea to heart because he was paid a $30 million salary for this movie. That was a record for an actor at the time. Way to go, Arnold. This is the final film that he completed before winning the governorship of Anton's home state.
Yeah, so that's I was going to say it's very exciting to know that this film, the film was released in the same year, and yeah, that was not only was it Schwarzenegger in the race, but there was a long list of weirdos that were running for governor that year because of the recall.
A total recall?
It was a total recall, which we don't have to dive into that here, but I think it was a bit of a landslide for who they wanted as governor instead. All right, so Ang Lee passed on the project to direct Hulk, which would also be released in the summer of 2003, and that would have been interesting. An Ang Lee directed Terminator sequel. Let's just think about what that could have been.
Probably would have been better.
I mean, I like Ang Lee as a director. I think that would have been it would have been a more layered film, that's for sure.
Maybe some sort of direction, I guess, would have been better.
And in March 2001, Jonathan Mostow is hired as director. Mostow invited his college classmates, John Brancato and Michael Ferris, to rework the screenplay. And although much of his draft was rewritten, Sarafian still got a story credit, and scenes were added to make it more of a road movie, fulfilling Mostow's vision for the film. The idea of a female Terminator was retained from Sarafian's draft, and the film's production budget was initially set at $170 million, making it the most expensive film ever to be greenlit at the time. But Titanic had ended up costing more. So the budget would include paying off the debts of Carolco, as well as a $5 million salary from Mostow and the then record $30 million salary for Schwarzenegger, which I like to think he put all of that money back into the state. At one point, Arnold deferred part of his salary in order to prevent the relocation of the set to Vancouver, British Columbia, from Los Angeles. So in a way, that's interesting to way to look at. He wanted to support the local economy.
That's why you voted for him.
Exactly. Oh, I couldn't vote at that time.
In
I was
spirit.
still a kid,
Yeah, in
but
spirit.
I voted 10 times in spirit. Edward Furlong. What's he up to nowadays? Edward Furlong was originally set to reprise his role as John Connor, but the producers decided to replace him due to substance abuse issues. That's a much more direct way than what I had read in another article that it was phrased as wanting to go in a different creative direction.
Yeah, there's a lot more you could read about that. We there's no point in really getting into it.
Right. Mostow lobbied hard for Nick Stahl to be cast as John Connor. I like to think is because he owed Stahl money. Stahl ended up auditioning 5 times for the role before being cast, which totally indicates confidence. Shane West, Jake Gyllenhaal, and Logan Marshall Green were all considered for the role, and any one of them could have done a better job than Nick Stahl.
Yes, we'll come back to this later in greater depth.
Yes.
I think I've found my second Garrett Hedlund.
Damn it, you stole my thunder. I was about to say I have found my Garrett Hedlund, Anton. You only get one, so you can keep
I only
Garrett
got
Hedlund.
one. I'll keep Garrett Hedlund, but yeah, we'll dive into it more.
Yeah.
Sarah Connor was originally featured in the script, and Linda Hamilton was offered the role, but declined after learning that her character was set to die halfway through the movie, and so they ended up writing her out of the movie entirely.
Sounds like she read the script and thought it sucked.
Yeah, that's a better translation.
Yeah.
The TX was originally written to be a male character. Vin Diesel was the studio's initial first choice, while backup choices included Kane Hodder, Andrew Brzezowski, Shaquille O'Neal, and Dwayne Johnson. The role was even considered for rapper 50 Cent and what would be his breakout performance.
I don't know about that.
Can we ask
this is from IMDb trivia, and you really have to take some of this with a grain of salt. Because I was thinking about this. 50 Cent's first album, Get Rich or Die Trying, came out in 2003. They were making this movie before 2003, so I highly doubt that they would have considered him.
Well, what was 50 Cent's first film? Was it Soul Plane 2?
Is that a Boondocks reference?
That is a Boondocks reference. Air Marshal 50 Cent.
I'm not going to do the voice, but if anyone's listening, just go look that up on YouTube. It is a riot.
Yeah. Love me some Boondocks.
Yeah.
It was later when they decided to rewrite the role for a female actor, and 10,000 women auditioned for the role of the TX. Arnold originally wanted wrestler China, R.I.P., to portray the TX. Famke Janssen was considered before Kristanna Loken was given the role. A lot of choices there.
I think you should give the role to China.
I think she would have made a great Terminator. Honestly, I really do.
She is the women's champ.
Yes.
She is
Go
my
find
vice
China.
governor.
Show me your leadership skills.
I've seen her in a match. She wrestled with Triple H.
Or like The Rock
terminated him
as the Terminator, and also China as like a backup term. Yeah, I think that would have worked.
I saw her hit a man with a steel chair. Sophia Bush was originally cast as Kate Brewster, but was replaced a month into filming with Claire Danes. Director Jonathan Mostow's excuse for letting Bush go was that she looked too young compared to the other actors. Raise your eyebrows to that one.
It's like, shouldn't they have identified that before they cast her in the role? Like,
Isn't that, yeah, that's a lot of casting decisions, but hey, we'll dive into that later, right?
Yeah.
Filming lasted from April to September 2002. By that time this was completed, the budget had grown to $187 million, making the film the most expensive independently produced film of all time. It's a bit odd to think about it that way, but this is considered an independent film. It was not financed by any Hollywood studio. Isn't that what do you guys think about that?
If you didn't know anything about Hollywood financing, you're like, there's no way this is an independent movie, but it actually is. These two guys, Kassar and Vajna, they got the funding for this massive budget all on their own
from the mob,
from somebody. But the point is, yeah, this was It was distributed by Warner Brothers in North America and by Columbia TriStar internationally, but they actually neither of those companies had anything to do with actually producing this film. And to give some context for those who if any of the listeners don't know, a film's distributor is responsible for marketing the film and getting it into theaters. They're actually not responsible for the budget. Now, more often than not, a company that produces a film will also distribute a film, like Disney does that a lot. But
Mhm.
in this case, they got independent financing for this enormously expensive movie on their own.
Is that 187? Is that indexed for inflation, or is that 187 in
No,
2002?
that's not indexed for inflation.
Because then that is an absurd number
Yes.
to think. Like,
Yeah,
that's a hell of an achievement to be able to.
I should have included the inflation numbers. You got to think that's like 250, $250,000 now at this
Yeah,
point.
easy. 250
Yeah.
close to 3, but that's still a hell of a lot of money just to raise on your own.
Yeah, and we mentioned this on the Troy episode. This was the most expensive movies ever made at this point. It was Titanic, it was this, and it was Troy. Unadjusted for inflation, of course. But I mean,
Troy.
this does not look like the second most expensive movie ever made. That's all I have
No.
to say.
What a letdown.
Yeah.
Definitely a lot of questions of Patrick, we've posed that question before. Where did the money where did the budget go? Right? Where was it put in for the film?
We know where $30 million went.
No, we're 35,
Right.
right? The director and Arnold.
Yeah. Ugh.
Yeah. Woof. Well, just to end there. Today you can see T3 sitting at a 69% Rotten Tomatoes score.
Do you guys feel 69 is fair? And I think the IMDb had it at 6.3.
That seems
Well,
too high.
Let's not
I agree
reveal
with you,
that
Anton.
yet.
Oh, sorry.
Hey, let's keep the listeners in suspense.
Sorry,
we
listeners.
may
Yeah.
love this movie. You never know.
Oh, that's true.
We might.
Well, on that note, let's talk about why this wasn't better. I have number one here, the story and the need for a sequel. I mentioned earlier how I would never rule out the possibility that there could have been a third film. James Cameron wanted to make this, but as far as the story of this movie goes and how it was executed, this is an absolutely unnecessary sequel that adds nothing to the overall story.
Yeah, agreed.
There's a lot of fan favorite scenes from the earlier film, especially the second one. And it kind of inserts them. You get a lot of similar dialogue from the earlier films. Seems like they were too lazy to write original dialogue. The minigun scene, the truck scene, the psychiatrist who shows up at the graveyard shootout. They reuse a lot of the same tropes.
Yeah. Short dialogue or lack of dialogue.
And this is the second time that an inferior sequel has come along and just kind of taken a dump on a Cameron movie. If you think about Aliens and what happened with Alien 3.
Oh, dear God.
This
It's
movie in
different.
particular, this is ultimately a sequel to a film that already had a definitive ending. Terminator 2 ended. The story was completely told. They destroyed the evidence of the Terminators. They prevented Judgment Day.
Or had they?
Apparently not.
I think to add on to that, Pat, I think it's one important consideration too is this was 12 years after T2, right? So even though they were mulling this back and forth and trying to figure out what to do, like it took a long time for them to come up with something even remotely passable as a Terminator movie.
Yes, it took them 12 years to make something completely unoriginal.
Correct.
Yeah, but not even just the originality segment is what that's not even my only issue with this. Like, I think the biggest reason why I dislike this so much is it kind of negates the theme of the first two movies. Like, if you think about the first film and the second one, right? There's no fate but what we make for ourselves. That gets mentioned a couple different times, right? You go back to Terminator 1. Kyle Reese, he spends the entire movie warning Sarah Connor about the near future, right? What happens with Cyberdyne, Skynet, all of it leading to Judgment Day. And he's hoping that she will use this information to fix the future, right? And then in the second Terminator movie, we actually see this happen. It's the perfect conclusion to get to what gets set up in the first film. They get Miles Dyson to help them destroy all of the existence of his own work. He gets killed in the process, Dyson does. The T-800 arm and the processor are destroyed. Arnold is destroyed. And then the T-1000 is defeated. So the evidence of their existence in 1990 whatever that was supposed to take place in, that gets wiped out. And then Sarah Connor's speech at the end confirms that they have effectively changed the future. But with this movie, Judgment Day still happens because it was only postponed, not stopped. Skynet goes online, it becomes self-aware, it launches the nukes, despite everything that happened in the previous films. It just never added up to me.
Can we also talk about how there was a scene where they were talking about, like, they were trying to set the film in current day, which I think was, when was it set, 2030? And they just, and I remember this fateful ending of like T2 where it was Edward Furlong, John Connor was in 8th grade, right? And then they just briefly glance over the fact that John Connor just disappeared from the 8th grade and was never discussed again, and then kind of resurfaced here. And then I'm going to save the rest of my commentary for your next section.
Okay.
I mean, it's you said it beautifully. Honestly, I don't think I can add anything here. The story didn't need a continuation, but we know Hollywood. We know that the dollar signs were too enticing. But did we expect this?
No, we didn't.
We did not.
No.
They could have gone anywhere with this story. Like, if they can't prevent Judgment Day, if they can't stop it, then like, what was the point of the second film? Like, what's the point of anything that they've previously established?
Seems like absolutely nothing.
No, exactly. Like they could have gone anywhere with the story. They could have any new original characters. Instead, we get another Terminator coming back in time to kill John Connor, and then we have a good Terminator played by Arnold sent back in time to protect him. Oh, right. And it's once again set in Los Angeles.
I think what was nice about the Terminator or T2 compared to the first Terminator was it definitely subverts expectations, where I think a lot of folks didn't expect Arnold's character to be a good guy in the second one.
Yeah,
and
correct.
It totally spins it on its head. And then how do you surprise the audience in the third one? You just make the Terminator villain a woman. It's like, huh?
It's funny you say that, Anton. So I'm embarking on this journey of my wife, Ashley. I love her dearly, but she has not seen many movies in her lifetime. So we started watching T1, and we're watching this movie. Everything's happening, and she keeps asking me questions. She's always like, oh, what's happening? What's happening? I'm like, just watch the movie. And she was so just destroyed that Arnold was a bad guy in the first movie. But it was believable, right? You were scared. You had nightmares about this thing with red eyes coming to kill you, right? What's going to happen? Then we watched T2, and she was already just set up for disappointment, right? Arnold's going to be a bad guy. He's going to come kill people. I'm going to be so devastated. And then, boom, flips him right around. He's essentially this good guy. And then we get to T3, and you know he's a good guy. You know there's someone coming, and it's just I just didn't understand it, right? And I feel like, and maybe this was his age that was showing, you actually believed he was a robot when you're filming the movie. Like, that's kind of what the vibe I kind of got when I was watching T3. Is like, I think he's actually a Terminator as opposed to a real human being that's acting like a Terminator.
Yeah, get that man an Oscar.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
Terminator 3, it offered nothing new to the franchise. It had none of the strong characters from the two films previously. Nope. You said it before we recorded, Pete. This is a cash grab.
Yeah, agreed.
It wasn't any different than the previous one, except the bad Terminator is a hot chick. It's the same exact setup. It even involves Arnold Schwarzenegger's Terminator going into a bar/club again to get leather clothes to wear again.
Really original, I must say.
Yeah. I thought the only part of it that could have been interesting, but they didn't go too much into it, they kind of hinted at it throughout the movie of how Skynet became Skynet and it started becoming self-aware with like the virus thing that it was doing to get the humans to put it online. Like, that could have been really interesting, but they don't spend a lot of time with it.
And here's the other thing, right? We always, like, we're just told Skynet wants to kill us, but we never really understand the reason why, right? In modern AI and all of this stuff that you see, it's usually, oh, human beings are imperfect or something, right? It's just Skynet wakes up and decides to kill all the people. And then 12 years later in T3, it just wakes up and wants to kill all of the people via a nuclear war again. And no one really understands why. It just does.
Yeah, it's like the Matrix paradox, kind of, where the machines just see humans as the enemy for whatever reason, because but you're right, they don't really explain it.
And in all fairness, they got away with it in the first two movies, and they were spectacular. So I can't blame them for saying we can probably get away with it again.
But that's the whole problem with this third movie. It's like you've done that trope already twice now. You don't really make an effort to switch it up a third time. It's going to get exposed. But I will say, at least the plot was like easy to follow. There didn't really seem to be a lot. I couldn't really find a lot of like holes in the plot. The concept of it is stupid because it's unoriginal, but at least it moves in a pretty linear fashion. And like I said, I didn't find many holes in it. But there's some context that I found when I was reading the novelization of this that I thought was interesting, and it would have. I think if they had included these bits, it would have improved things. So in the novelization, it's revealed that Cyberdyne went bankrupt and that the project that would eventually become Skynet was undertaken by another company with some like Pentagon funding. The excuse that they make for Judgment Day only being postponed is that the government was already aware of Cyberdyne's work and they already had their fingers in that pie. So, but here's the only real hole I can find in that plot. Wouldn't the Terminator from the future know that?
I mean, I think there's already been a lot of just speculation or just confusion around time travel writing in general, just how confusing it is. I mean, James Cameron even said like there's multiverse theory, in which case any changes being done, like there's no way to actually change the future, but you can go to a different reality. So
it's like in a way you can hop laterally, but you can't change the direction.
Right. You can't because technically if someone was already able to change the future, wouldn't they have already done it? In which case we wouldn't even be in the situation we're currently in, kind of thing.
But that's my problem with this movie's story exactly, is they made it clear in the first two films you could change the future. And in here they're like, actually, no, you can't. That was a waste of your time.
And the other thing to you, Anton, is it's going back to that thing I said earlier, right? They tried to put it in the same universe by saying he just disappeared in 8th grade and then his foster parents died, right? And we all remember that scene, right?
Right.
In T2. So it's like they kind of were saying, hey, we're going here. We think this is it. And they just kind of did nothing with it. And then they said, okay, we're done now.
What I was going to say, kind of in conclusion of this reason, I can only speak for myself. What I wanted out of this movie was like 2 hours of like nonstop future war. The problem with this movie and some of the later ones is that ever since the first Terminator movie, we've been told about this like epic battle in the future where the human resistance destroys Skynet. But apart from a couple of brief glimpses, we never actually see this battle take place. Now, we come close to it. We get a little bit of that in the next movie, the one with Christian Bale, Salvation.
Yes.
But that also did not offer me enough. I think a lot of Terminator fans would agree with me about this movie. Nobody was interested in seeing like a watered down remake of Terminator 2. It's not what we wanted to see.
Agreed. And I think one of the notes that I wrote here too, Pat, because I was writing this real time as I was watching the movie, I wrote, the concept is still good. It was nice to see they had a Terminator and another Terminator that was defending him, but like they had computers at this time, right? Like they had CGI, they had special effects. And granted, the stunts in the movie were great, but I got to concur with that, man. We were looking for that devastating robot on human battle, right? And it just, I think Rise of the Machines is like, holy crap, they're coming for us. But then it just turned out to be your CD player wanted to kill you. And I think it's a bit of a letdown.
Funny enough, the first two chapters of the novelization give us that exactly, which means it was in the script and they could have put this in the movie, but they didn't, probably for budgetary purposes. But just to summarize this real quick, the first two chapters of the novelization takes place in the future in 2030, and it's about a team of resistance fighters trying to sneak into Skynet's AI mainframe to destroy it with a nuclear bomb. They end up discovering the TX before she gets sent back in time. She wipes out the team. And then Skynet makes the decision to send her back to take out John Connor. And there's a lot of dialogue. John Connor, like future resistance leader John Connor, he's featured in the first two chapters. His wife is in there, and like the leader of this team. And there's a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of description about how the machines function, specifically the time machines. And they actually do a really good job of establishing why they can't send back a lot of Terminators in time, because there's only two time machines in the whole world. One of them's controlled by the humans. The other one is controlled by the machines. And it takes like an enormous amount of power to actually use it. So they can only use it like very, very sparingly. I found all that stuff fascinating. It would have made this movie more interesting if they had included this, but they didn't.
Is that why, like, okay, so super complex AI, they can send back the most advanced robots to go terminate John Connor. But the Resistance has kind of this not so good time machine, and all they can get is like carbon copies of Arnold Schwarzenegger, like the T-800 and the T-1000. Because I feel like the best way to describe it is the TX is kind of like your supercharged BMW M3 or McLaren. And it seems like the Resistance that's supposed to be kind of saving the world for the most important person on the planet is sending back Toyota Corollas every time.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And
They have they have the same time machine that the machines have, but the difference is the machines can send back their most advanced, like the most advanced thing that they can make, and the humans have to get a Terminator intact. They have to reprogram it.
and then
So
send it back.
they're just working with it, whatever they can find.
Got
That's
it.
why they send back an old, outdated Terminator.
And I presume they can't, even if they captured the TX, they wouldn't be able to reprogram it because the programming is so advanced.
Possibly.
Okay,
The
speculation.
novel doesn't. The novelization doesn't touch on that, but
Okay.
you can see where I'm going with this, right? Like this would have helped this movie's plot out a lot if they had included some of this, but none of this is in the movie.
I was gonna say, guys, this is really this is really defending the film's plot, but it's not like they used it.
Right. That's exactly.
Can we get paid $30 million to write this movie, or like, does it work like that?
If we go back in time,
Yeah, we need a time machine.
So, how exactly did they build this time machine, Patrick?
I can, if you want, I can send you the novelization. They actually provide like a really lengthy technical explanation of how the time machines work. It's pretty interesting. It's too bad it wasn't actually in the movie. It involved quantum physics. That's all I can tell you.
So, I say we petition for a novelization with TX as China and the T-1000. You know what? Let's make it The Rock. Why not? Fan fiction, YouTube, 30-minute short. Come on, we can put that out there. Someone has to be able to produce that.
Yeah, I mean, in this era of wrestling, or just
Yeah.
like they could have sent John Cena.
Also, good candidate.
Possibly. You know who would make a good Terminator? Is Zlatan Ibrahimovic.
Oh
he
yeah, I
would.
can see that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can see that.
Or
Yeah.
Ivan Rakitic.
Ivan. Anything to add on the story before we move on to the next reason?
I think something interesting with the T3 comparison to 1 and 2 is this may seem like very anecdotal or just like maybe I don't have exactly the evidence to point out, but I just feel like the first two had more heart to it, whereas 3 just felt more hollow.
Yeah, I can concur with that. Definitely.
And you could see that in the layers. Like Patrick, you put it really beautifully, like what the first two, the message that the first two films really gave you, and like that just felt. You didn't get really a very clear message with the third one, nor were any of the characters really captivating to really pull you in to like care about their story either. So just very poor story.
I think you can look at the director for that reason.
Yeah. But why wasn't it better? Reason number 2, and I wanna kick this one off because Patrick, I think you have quite a few words as we go to this reason. The second reason for why this film wasn't better was the acting and the characters.
Yes.
So the first one was a given in terms of writing Sarah out of the film was a mistake. There was another. I love this in the notes. Another adult was needed in the room. You could see it. It felt like John Connor was without a paddle throughout a lot of that film, and yeah, they needed a babysitter. All of them did, but Nick Stahl. I mean, Patrick. Do you love Nick Stahl?
He sucks. He's terrible. He's a
Oh,
terrible
boy.
John Connor.
Okay.
He has
Okay.
no charisma, and when I say he has no charisma, I really like they might as well have just hired a department store mannequin to play John Connor. It would have been better.
And better for the budget.
Yeah.
It would have saved him at least $500,000.
Gosh, if you got paid
That's
500 grand for that, that's a bold
I
figure.
can't imagine.
That's a lot.
I can't imagine he commanded a lofty salary. But his character is poorly written. They made the very strange decision to make him an obvious loser.
Yes.
This is something I just could not get over. The first time I saw this and then subsequent rewatch, I understand he's trying to live off the grid, but do we really need to make him like a literal bum who's breaking into vet clinics to steal pills? Like, this is the future savior of humanity? Like, really?
And I'll add to that, right? I'm a big underdog guy. I'm always going to root for the underdog. I found myself wanting to root for him, but I just saw he was this unlikable guy that was trying to steal ketamine from a vet clinic. And I found myself thinking the exact thing, Pat. Like, how is this guy supposed to prevent the worst machine attack on humanity when this guy can barely steal ketamine effectively?
Are we talking about the character or what Nick Stahl did in real life?
Did he do that in real life?
I thought no, like I thought he was arrested for like drug possession, but like nothing cool like coke. It was like meth.
Maybe that's why they cast him for the role, because they're like,
I don't know anything about it, but they could have. But if that's what they wanted for the role, they could have gotten Edward Furlong back.
Yeah,
that's you're right.
So it's like that, but this is the other part where it's just bad writing. If he's technically on the run, if he's on the lam, right, to use a mob term, why would he stay in L.A.? The place where he grew up, the place where like multiple people would know him and recognize him,
including Kate Brewster.
I have in my notes here, I have some ideas about where he could have gone. Literally anywhere he could have gone. I have some suggestions here: Idaho, New York City, Texas, Atlanta, Hawaii, Alaska, Colorado, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Chicago, Florida. You see where I'm going with this?
Canada.
Hell, he could have gone outside the United States. But no, he chose to stay in Los Angeles, where they make movies.
Populated cities on the planet. Yeah, I guess now that I think about it, they didn't really touch on that. Like, why did he stay in LA for 12 years living off the grid as a ketamine
It's a bad
addict?
script, Pete. It's a bad script. Yeah, I never bought that he would become this badass messiah who would lead the resistance against the machines. There's not a single moment in the film that indicates he has any kind of leadership material.
Yeah, agreed.
It wasn't when he was at the command center at the dawn of Judgment Day.
No,
dear God,
no.
I get to a few more lines till we get to that point in the story. I have some very, very harsh words for
John Connor. I don't know how to work this thing, but
it's very clear it didn't feel earned, right?
No. Agreed.
And I don't know if you noticed this, Anton. Much like Marky Mark in Planet of the Apes, he's breathing through his mouth through a majority of this movie.
He's a mouth breather.
Marky Mark
doesn't help.
Great movie, by the way, Planet of the Apes. Also, not a great movie.
You
at
liked
the same
it?
Time. No, I hated it. I thought it was terrible.
Moving on. Do you have any thoughts on Edward, or not Edward? Do you have any thoughts on Nick Stahl, or have I said it all?
I mean, you said it all. I think you were a little generous with a $500,000 budget.
I wonder if we can even see that. Right? Let's see. Nick Stahl.
There's some of that stuff's public. Some of it's not. You never know.
He actually had to pay them to be in the movie.
He auditioned 5 times.
Yeah.
He had to convince them.
Yeah, that's just so like the. Yeah, we'll continue because there's more to. There's more than just than just Nick Stahl. But yes, Nick Stahl was terrible.
Him and the Terminator, they have zero chemistry, and that got me thinking maybe we all took Edward Furlong's performance in the second movie for granted because he has great chemistry with Arnold, and it's one of the best things about that movie.
Agreed.
Their chemistry.
Just watching that, and you know what? I just watched Wonder Woman with Ashley, and by the way, it's a horrendous movie, but it's. I was glad that we were talking about recording this because it was like, how do I put it this way? You have a character living in a current timeline and someone that's not from here trying to adapt and conform to societal norms. And I was thinking back to T2 of just how well they did that, right? Where he's like, put the guy down, stand on one leg. You told me not to kill someone. And it just feels so natural. And then I was watching Wonder Woman and I was like, wow, you really have to respect what they did there. And that was just completely missing in this movie. It was like Arnold was there. He was the star. Then you had homeless John Connor that was there. And then Claire Danes, future Homeland star at that point in time.
You have to think the bad writing is what it is, but you have to think that this is at least a slightly better movie with someone like Shane West or especially Jake Gyllenhaal. This is a much better performance with Jake Gyllenhaal.
Yeah, or at least anyone but Nick Stahl.
A
really.
department store mannequin.
Department store mannequin would have been a great candidate.
They could have CGI'd his character and it might have been better. Claire Danes, what do you think? I think she sucks here.
I thought the character was really bad. Very boring.
Agreed. I think Claire Danes, I've always had mixed feelings about her as an actress. I mean, even in Homeland, I thought she was good, but I just, and maybe I'm biased, I just really never bought into her as an actress in any of these roles. I thought she was...
Me neither.
Completely out of place. Not to mention she was the daughter of one of the most powerful generals in the military at the time, and you're a veterinarian that's kind of lost in life. I don't buy it, right? And people may judge me for saying that, but I just don't buy it. It wasn't believable. I think they could have picked anyone, really. Maybe another department store mannequin, I think, would have been a better candidate.
No one will judge you here.
I don't know. I was questioning why. I'd be curious to see how much she got paid as well, but I don't really understand why she was selected for the movie.
She was a last-minute replacement. We know that. I mean, she also has zero chemistry with Nick Stahl. Now, I understand they're not supposed to get along when they first meet, but they have nothing going on.
Mm-mm. And they were supposedly... Right, they were supposed to... Didn't they date? And they like kissed in high school, and they dated in high school?
Yeah.
And then years later, this is like the rekindling of the love that they're supposed to make this future baby, I think. Is that, if I remember correctly?
They end up and getting married and having kids in the timeline, but you don't actually see that in the movie. You don't see that.
So a homeless guy marries a mediocre veterinarian who's the daughter of a general of the military. Yeah. And they supposedly... And listen, a love story is a love story. I get it. I want to buy it. I'm totally rooting for them, but
there's no love story here.
I can't get into it.
It's just so depressing. I mean, maybe it was the way that the characters were written, but if the message of the film is just like, you can't escape your fate, it's just like, well, you're gonna marry a loser and you're gonna be stuck in Judgment Day no matter what you wanted. You wanted to be a vet, too bad.
We really missed the scene where she explains to her dad who John Connor is. Like, oh, is this your fiance? He's like, no, I don't have a job. I don't know her. We hooked up once in 8th grade, but...
It's just so bad. Just horrible writing.
What do you think of Arnold in this movie?
Oh, man. Just... If there was ever, like this was way past Arnold's prime.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that... At this point, it was more so probably like getting that payday and then just helping another stepping stone to really get him even more popularized for the general public for the election.
Yeah, agreed. And it was clear too. You can see it even with makeup and everything. Like he's aged, right? And
yeah,
I think it's important to evaluate it two ways. Subjectively, he's Arnold. He's the man. Listen, it was the greatest performance I've ever seen in T3, okay? But objectively, I mean, he's older now, right? And Anton, I agree with you. I think he was essentially taking that payday. And I think even what he said to Cameron, even what Cameron said to him, take the money, right? This was his stepping stone for governor. This was his money to be able to run the campaign. And you know what? I still support him, right? To this day, I see why he did it. But you can see it, right? He was out of his acting prime, and I think I said it earlier. He makes you believe he was a robot. It's going to sound ridiculous, but I wanted more from him. I wanted to see more of a Terminator from him, but I got Arnold that was older, that happened to be a Terminator. If that makes any sense.
No, that totally makes sense.
It makes sense because they were just relying on the same plot tropes and the same dialogue from the second movie. It was just carbon copy.
Yeah.
What about the other Terminator in this movie? The TX.
So much
Boring.
potential. So much
So
potential.
boring, though.
Yeah.
Poor execution. Absolutely poor execution. I think. All right, and I have to use, and tell me if I'm doing this too much. I have to use the first two movies as a stepping stone, right? I forget the gentleman's name that was T2. Robert Martin? What's his name?
Robert Patrick.
Robert Patrick.
Robert Patrick.
I remember seeing this guy.
He grew up with Tony Soprano.
Do you really?
Yes. No.
I remember
Yes,
seeing this guy, and my bones would be, I would be horrified. Like, this guy was something out of a nightmare. I see Christiana Loken. I'm like, okay, cool. She's a Terminator. She's good looking, but I don't get that same, wow, she's a Terminator. She's going to come kill me and I'm going to die. Right. And I think one of the two of the scenes that I always think of from T2 that are burned in my head of like, I don't even want to, I guess, borderline trauma, right, is one of the scenes where Robert Patrick is on the phone and he's got his finger through the guy's head and it's through the milk carton. Like, you don't really get, I only got that vibe once from Christiana Loken where I was like terrified. Maybe it's because I was more of an adult, but I feel like they were more horror movies, right? Meant to scare you. And that's what the Terminator was. This Terminator was like, I'm just going to come after you and I have some cool stuff that we're not really going to build on. And I hope to God it kind of works out.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to use film tropes, I think that, you know, we talked about subverting audience expectations with the second, you know, T2 film in terms of expecting who the villain was. I don't think necessarily using a woman to depict the TX was a bad decision because there's a lot of subversion you can do there, like a woman being like the most domineering villain of the film, wherein typically you see in films like that's the character that's being chased in horror films, right? That's usually the subject that's being chased by the monster. So, and then in those same ways, you can even depict, there's a trope of the femme fatale, the seductress. Those are a couple really fun ways they could have used the TX. But let's think about the ways that the TX even killed some of John Connor's comrades. It was the scene where it wasn't using her seductive powers. It was going into the drive-thru and asking for the dude's name and then just shooting him.
Yeah, right. Or maybe if the roles were flipped, Anton. Like, Arnold went back to being the bad guy, and the TX actress was actually the protector. I feel like I would have bought that a little more.
Yeah, and that'd be cool. I could see that being interesting. Heck, I'd take that over what they did with T3.
She's a strange antagonist for a lot of reasons. You mentioned a bunch of them.
And there, I will say, shout out to her. There's a kill scene where she's in the back of a cop car, and
yes,
she kills the cops. She literally stabs one of the guys through the chest. He dies, and then begins to steer the car with her arms. Nuts. I think that was an awesome scene. I loved it. That was the vibe that I got, and I was like, okay, I'm scared now. I was like, this lady's coming for me. I get it now. And then after that, that was like 30 seconds of an almost 2-hour movie. And I feel like
the execution.
I feel like they called Cameron up and they were like, "We need help," and he's like, "Listen, just stab the cops, have her drive, and that's it." That was his only contribution to the movie after that.
Well, you're right. It doesn't feel like any other part of what she does, because even the technology she uses is strange. Like the ability to remote control stuff. That's a really cool concept.
Yeah.
But it's executed strangely. Like how does she control cars that require someone to physically be in the car? Like this isn't like a Tesla where you can remote control it. Like, she's controlling like Ford Crown Victorias. Like, someone needs to be in the car to drive it. You can't remote control that car.
It doesn't really work. There's no computers yet.
She also, I don't know if you guys noticed this, she conveys like emotion in a bunch of different scenes. When she kills that woman at the vet clinic and like she licks the blood to identify,
that was weird.
She appears like excited that it's John Connors. And then later on, she gets angry a bunch of different times when she can't kill people that she wants to kill. It's like, that's not how a Terminator's supposed to operate.
It's not how a robot works.
No. The best part, though, and by best I mean worst, is when When the detectives go to Catherine's home and her fiance, who's like really the TX, he answers the door and he's like, do you know where your fiance is? He's like, no. He gives like this goofy smile, like he's stoned, and he's just like, I'll help you look for her. Like, I don't think that's how it works. I don't think cops just let you
Yeah.
ride along when your fiance is missing. You're probably the prime suspect. And they're like, yeah, just come. You can come with us. It's fine.
Was the world a different place back then, or like was this just another bad writing piece?
No, that
Bad
made no
writing.
sense.
Okay,
That's bad
okay. I
writing.
just wanted to make sure. I'm always willing to see both sides, right? I always got to give it some consideration. I'm looking to look for the good, but okay, you've confirmed it. It's just bad writing.
Yeah, it was 20 years ago. It wasn't the 50s. This was
Fair.
this was still weird then.
There's not a lot of supporting characters to lend a hand here either. You know, sometimes with a movie, if the lead characters are weak, sometimes you'll have a strong supporting cast that can really bolster things. Like Anton, when we were talking about Troy, we talked about how Brad Pitt was arguably miscast, but the rest of the cast in that movie was so strong that you ended up not minding him too much.
Eric Bana.
Right.
Yeah, he didn't fine.
Yeah.
But the only other major characters we get here, we get Catherine's father, the general, but he's in the movie for like maybe 10 minutes. There's just no one else to help out, right? Like there's no Miles Dyson in this movie. Miles Dyson is a minor character in the second film, but he's one of the most memorable things about that movie. It's such a great performance and a great character. There's nothing like that here.
Okay. So I've been saving this for a while because this is something that was absolutely mind blowing to me. This guy was a 4-star general of the military about to launch one of the most complex military AI programs known to mankind at the time, correct?
Yes.
Right.
There is a scene where he's in this base and the TX is coming and she turns into his daughter, right? And then his daughter is also on the other side of the room. So imagine him in the middle of the room and they're both running to him. So he literally sees his daughter, then realizes it's not his daughter, and then stays there and then proceeds to take a bullet. Does this make him the worst general in the American military whatsoever? Because that's what?
He did not come across as competent at any point.
I think that's the best way to, like, I remember seeing that and I was like, this guy just got shot like that? Like, come on. Really? And he explicitly realizes that it's not his daughter. I think when you rewatch it, you'll see it again and you'll be like, oh yeah, okay, this kind of makes sense. Like, what the hell happened here?
That whole sequence, you're right. And everything that involved him and Skynet, that should have been the most interesting part of the story.
Yeah.
How Skynet came to be online and everything. But it's just sidelined and it's barely explained.
Well, that takes us
I think that
through this roster of actors and actresses that did not carry this film well. And nor did were they written for success. So very, very, very poor marks for the acting and characters.
Number 3 reason why this wasn't better, the production overall. This is an action movie, right?
Right.
yes.
What did we think of the action?
You'd be pleasantly surprised with some gems of action, of some of the action. Some, not all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. One thing I have to say, and I wrote this down, the cinematography of the movie I think is really smooth, right? Transitions, the way they were making shots, the way it kind of flowed, I think was great. Now, when I say cinematography, I mean the way they filmed it. Exclude the story and anything that has to do with the subjective nature of the movie. I think, and I said this to you
Yes.
earlier, Pat, I think the action scenes, you can really see they spent their money there, right? When viewed in isolation, the stunts that they did were amazing, right? And how they pulled them off, I think, was absolutely cool. You really saw the money shine in the explosions, everything that was being destroyed, and I think it really made you feel like it was a Terminator movie, and you kind of forgot why the story was so bad. And it kind of felt almost like a Michael Bay movie in a way, where things are just blowing up, and you're like, okay, I can tolerate this. I'm okay with this.
I agree. The action, particularly that big truck chase, it's really well done.
Yeah.
It is. They filmed that all practically, and you can tell they spent a lot of money. It's very well done, generally speaking.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mostow, he did like an acceptable job, I would say, of imitating Cameron's visual style. Everything looks passable. I thought the best thing going for it was that at 1 hour and 40 minutes, I think it's well paced. It never really drags.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
I'd agree with that.
Here's the downside to this. He's not James Cameron. Cameron's 15-minute 3D attraction for Universal was more exciting than this entire movie.
Oh my gosh.
That's a bold call, but warranted. And
I stand by it.
I agree. I do.
No, that's rough. It's rough to hear, but it's true.
It is. It's tough to stomach, man. But I agree with you there. I do.
Whoever made the decision to give this a campier tone than the previous two, never be involved in making movies again. It was a huge mistake. Parts of this feel like a parody of a Terminator film. The cornball humor. I'm specifically talking about when Arnold puts on the Elton John sunglasses. That whole thing in the club. Talk to the hand. The TX enhancing the size of her breasts, and she's like, "I like your gun."
That was ridiculous.
I just wanted to cringe. I'm like, what is this doing in this movie?
It felt like, and how do I say this? Do you remember, and I'm sure we've all, and hopefully the listeners have seen Fast and the Furious here. Do you remember when you were watching the Fast and the Furious movies and then Han died, then suddenly came back, and then you're watching it in the theater and everyone's like, oh, like everyone, it didn't have to make any sense of where he went and how he came back, but everyone was just, you were looking for that shock factor, right? And it feels like there's things that you described, they were looking for that in the theater, and I just don't think they got it, right? Like they're looking for the talk to the hand and everyone's saying, oh, or the TX enhancing the size of her breasts and waiting for that. And I just feel like you
I see what you're saying.
Right, you're waiting for it, but you didn't get it, right? And they just completely missed the mark.
It's just a baffling decision on their part. They're like, we're gonna make a Terminator movie, but we're gonna put this like Naked Gun humor in it. I don't get it.
What a gem!
I
of
don't.
A movie.
Yeah, it's important to note though maybe it's just the way that the humor was. It was just maybe poorly timed humor. I think like it just felt very like, let's just throw a joke in there, but it's not actually, the timing's not right, or like it just comes off like a very poorly, or just a very poor punchline, because there was humor like in the second Terminator.
Yes.
That I thought landed really well.
Yeah, for the most part, yeah.
But and we've seen action films do like when there's like the right dose of comedy can help ease tension or actually add a lot to the story. So I don't think that. Yeah, I think that it was just like you said, it was just very cornball humor that felt very out of place.
There was no reason for it either. Like in Terminator 2, like the corniest thing in that movie is probably "Hasta la vista, baby," right? But
right.
At least there was an actual reason for him saying it, because if you remember, John's telling the Terminator, you need to start talking like a human if you want to pass for a human. You need to say things that humans say. And he's teaching him all this different slang, and he ends up saying that. There's really no reason for the Terminator to say "talk to the hand," except they were just deliberately trying to make a joke.
Right. Like again, like it's just a poor punchline.
Yeah.
Like it's not funny. It's just semblance of a joke, but not actually a joke.
Just makes you raise your eyebrows.
Yes. This is a rated R movie. Did you know that?
I didn't.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah, definitely.
I didn't know that until I was reading everything today. I was like, wow, I felt like it was PG-13.
Pretty soft R.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Except for that gore of the TX putting her arm through the cop. But if you think about it, the rest of the kills, they're all off screen. She shoots people off screen. She buzzsaws the fiance off screen. The CGI blood looks like Kool-Aid. There's no nudity in the movie. Like obviously she shows up naked. They don't even show her naked. I'm not saying we have to see her naked, but it's like, it's rated R. You just throw it in there. Why not?
Yeah, you have the right to, you've already claimed the right to do it by rating it R. Go for it.
Yeah, like we saw Arnold's dong in the first movie. Like we could have seen her naked here, but no, wouldn't do that.
But no, it was very
not really profanity in the movie either. But you touched on this earlier, Pete. They waited 12 years to make this movie. By 2003, Arnold just not the megastar that he was in the 90s.
Yeah.
We already touched on this, but...
Yeah, but you needed to have him. You couldn't make this film without
Right.
Arnold.
There was no way this was getting made without him.
Yeah, because the Terminator with Pete, Anton, and Patrick would have completely flopped well before it even hit the theaters.
Well,
actually...
This movie did not flop, technically.
It's true.
But... it doesn't seem like it actually made a lot of money. According to Arnold himself, this film barely broke even. That's how expensive it was. Now, James Cameron, he has said some things about this movie over the years. Anton, you brought up the bad dream quote, which is hilarious. He also said, quote, I felt as a filmmaker, maybe I've gone beyond it. I really wasn't that interested. I felt like I told the story I wanted to tell. I suppose I could have pursued it more aggressively and gone to the mat for it, but I felt like I was laboring in someone else's house to an extent because I had sold the rights very early on. End quote. And there's a lot of rumors that both he and Schwarzenegger were pretty upset with how the film turned out, which can't blame him.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised. Like, honestly, both of them, Schwarzenegger and Cameron, they strike me as people that care about the craft.
Yeah, I can agree with that. And this is like, what was the original Terminator one of Cameron's first films? And admittedly, I'm not a film historian, because like,
yes,
he put his soul
technically
into
it was
that,
his
man.
second film.
Which one was his first one?
Piranha 2.
Gold. Absolute gold.
But there's a lot of controversy over that in terms of like how much of it did he actually direct. It's kind of unclear. But for all intents and purposes, The Terminator was his first film that he was in control of.
Yeah, I think, Anton, you said it earlier. You felt the heart in that, man. That was a story. I don't even want to say it was a story. Like, you felt the emotion throughout the movie. And
Right.
it didn't stop. It took 25, 30 minutes for it to start. And when it started, it did not stop until the end. And that makes a good movie, right? This one just kind of felt like it was fumbling the entire time. And it took a recipe that worked, and I feel like I'm just summarizing everything that you said already. It just completely fell short. It really did.
Yep, definitely.
Before we wrap this up, I have a quote here from the late, great Roger Ebert, who had a talent for summarizing these films. This is from his review. Quote, essentially one long chase and fight punctuated by comic, campy, or simplistic dialogue, end quote.
Hit it right on the head.
Really well put.
Yeah.
God bless him, man.
Anything we want to add? We talked about the story and the need for this to be a sequel. We talked about the acting and the characters, and we talked about the production. Is there anything we want to add before we start to wrap this up?
Just a
give our thoughts.
Quick shout out to the stunt coordinators. Don't know who you guys are, and did a great job, man. I think you did your job well.
Just because I was reminded earlier in the note, shouts out to Elizabeth Berkley. Showgirls, while it wasn't a great film, always have a crush on you. And that's my commentary on this film, Terminator 3.
Well said. All right, well, wrapping it up now, we talk about, did we like this movie? Pete, since you are our guest, would you like to go first or last?
Oh, boy.
There's no wrong answer.
I know. I'm thinking about this. I don't want to steal your thunder, but I also don't want to...
Would you like to go second?
I'll go second. I think second's a happy medium.
Okay.
Yeah, I will go second. Sorry, Anton.
Anton, would you like to go first, or do you want me to?
More than happy to.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, like any, like, you know, at the time, preteen would be excited for any action film coming out. Being able to look at it from this lens of just what makes a good action film, T3 was not. And especially considering all the evidence, this could have been a better film. But when you add all the ingredients for a bad one, you you get the horrible cake that you bake. So not much really else to add to it. I still do really like the Terminator franchise. Some of the video games that came out on the PlayStation 2 actually were much better than the T3 film. And I think that by revisiting the franchise as much as, or by revisiting the IP that studios have, it is a popular franchise that I would say deserves attention, and it deserves continuation. And it's just unfortunate that it also had the unfortunate circumstance of coming after, in a lot of people's opinion, the best film of the franchise. So it was T3. It was Rise of the Machines. I'm gonna have to give it, for me, I'm giving it a D, a solid D.
Peter.
Okay. So I think it's important to paint some context here, right? T1, T2, and I have to agree with Anton. I think it kind of felt like, I'm a huge Batman fan. It kind of felt like a Dark Knight Rises, right? And in that franchise, I think you see Batman Begins, good movie. Dark Knight, fantastic movie, leaves a legacy. Dark Knight Rises, good, but not as good, right? And I think what you got here, T1, fantastic movie. T2, exceptional movie. And T3, complete letdown, right? If it got closer to something of a passable movie, I think I would have felt better about it. I think the stunts, fantastic. I think shout out to those guys. I think it was amazing. Special effects were great. The story, I think, was loose. The actor and actress performance, I think there was some bad selection in the screenplay. D, I think, is fair. I'm gonna say, I think I'm just kind of a little more of an optimist. I'm gonna say D plus, primarily because of the stunts. Looking out further, I think the Terminator franchise is something that I love. I really hate to say it, but I don't really care who's in the movie. I'm gonna watch every one. It's just the way I am. I think the concept of robot machines coming to kill people, it's something that I will probably watch until the day I die, or hopefully not die by the hands of a robot machine. So I think if I had to go letter grade, I'm going D plus, and the plus is specifically for the stunt guys and gals.
Very well said.
Well said.
All right, Patrick.
I was
take us
very
home.
excited for this movie. I have a very specific memory of walking into this theater convinced that I would be getting something, a worthy successor to the second movie. That was very foolish thinking on my part. There was a lot of red flags going into this movie. Cameron not being involved, it will always be a what if. Talk about a tough act to follow. We didn't even really talk about which of the first two movies we prefer. I like them both. I think I edge a little bit towards Terminator 2. It just how entertaining it was. But this movie, I have in my notes here, it feels like a Terminator tribute band. It's like watching fan fiction or something. And it's not just because Cameron wasn't involved. This is like Terminator Light. Like it's a decent action movie, but as a sequel to Terminator 2, it's completely unfulfilling. We talked about the unoriginal story. We talked about the mannequin acting. There's just nothing very special about this movie. It really is a cash grab. I rate this a D. I think this movie stinks.
It's so like so spot on with like this feels like a fanfic or Terminator Light. This would have been perfect. It would have been perfect then if it was completely the same, except you don't have Arnold and you don't have instead of Arnold being like the big star from the previous films that was in it, you still only have what's his name play the psychiatrist.
Oh, Dr. Silver.
And that's the only connection. And that's the only connection to the previous film.
Wait, do we?
Because then it's truly a B movie.
Do we even talk about his random cameo 12 years in the future?
It's stupid. It's just a fan fiction thing.
I feel like they again, right, tried to go for the O factor with maybe a C minus character from T2.
Yeah. Like, if you showed me this movie, if you sent this movie to me as like a YouTube link and you were like, check this out, I'd been like, wow, this is like a pretty good fan film. But then if you told me like, no, that's like, this cost like $200 million and this is the third Terminator movie, I'm like, oh, okay.
How do we bet against that company?
Yeah. Well, I don't think they made much movies after this. Like I said, it didn't make a lot of money despite the numbers being good on paper. If you could see me on camera right now, you could see me shrugging.
I'm sure Anton and I both know that face.
Yep. Oh, man.
That's it for Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines.
Or Fall of the Machines.
Anton, it's your turn to pick. What's next week's episode?
I'm a sucker for animation. Let's visit Incredibles 2.
Ooh, good one.
Wow. That's a movie that's near and dear to my heart.
Is it?
In a good way?
Tune in next week to find out.
Yeah, just a reminder to all of our listeners, on our previous episode where we gave a preview of this season, we went over the movies that we'll be covering. Those movies, the list of those movies is also available on the Twitter and the Instagram. if you want to see it. Well, Peter, this has been a wonderful experience.
It has. I actually had a lot of fun today. I hope I didn't let your listeners and fans down. I think I enjoyed this. I enjoyed this a lot, and I really, if you guys will have me back, I'm glad to do it. I think it was a ton of fun. It really was.
Oh,
We
gladly
would
we'll
love
have
to
you
have
back.
you back.
Yeah.
And if you let our listeners down, we will mail them a refund.
Wow, that's hardcore. I like that. I support the refund. If you're disappointed, consumers, I get it.
Well, okay. So here's the rest of the lineup for the season in alphabetical order because we haven't decided the release except for next week's. So next week we have Incredibles 2, and then in alphabetical order, here's the rest: Airport, Alien 3, Death Note, Fantastic Voyage, Hannibal. We're gonna do the new Indiana Jones movie.
The new Indiana Jones movie?
Yeah, I think we want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Mission Impossible, the first one.
Okay.
Hang on 1 second. That is my cat trying to get out of the room. Give me 1 second.
Cat Darms. It was good to see him.
Sorry about that.
How was Cat Darms?
Well, there's a few cat arms now.
Uh-oh. My dog.
Right, so we've got, where did I leave off? Mission Impossible, No Time to Die, Ocean's 12, Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, Spectre, Spider-Man 3, Star Trek, the motion picture, Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, and Thor.
Oof. Okay. Read them again after Mission Impossible again. I got
No Time to Die, Ocean's 12, Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End.
Oh, God. It's horrendous.
Spectre, Spider-Man 3, Star Trek the Motion Picture, Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, and Thor. A couple of those are already taken.
Okay, which are the ones that are taken?
We have guests lined up for Attack of the Clones, Spider-Man 3, and Pirates of the Caribbean.
Oh, okay.
And Death Note.
Okay.
Yep.
Star Trek the Motion Picture, the original or the Chris Pine ones?
The original from 1979.
Oof. Oh, man. Let me see.
That's a fun one.
It is a fun one.
No pressure to decide now.
We don't have to decide right now.
Well, I'm trying. I want to claim a good
mull
movie.
Mull it over.
I would definitely do Hannibal or any one of the Bond movies and even Mission Impossible. Or whatever you guys want. Like I'll give you guys a multiple list and I'll say I'll either do Hannibal, Mission Impossible, Ocean's 12, or any one of the Bond movies. If you guys have other people, fill them into the slots. Like if you have multiple people that want to do Hannibal, use them up, right? Give the listeners some variety. I'm here to kind of be a comic voice if I need to, but I will do any one of those. Star Trek, truthfully, I'm probably not going to watch the old one. I'm a huge. I watched the show growing up, but I'm a huge Chris Pine Star Trek fan.
Fair enough. All right. Well, we'll talk about it offline. But Peter, thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome. My pleasure.
That is it for this week's edition of Why Wasn't It Better? As always, this podcast was produced to you by Eric Taylor, who also provided us with that wonderful intro music. We will be back next week with Incredibles 2.